Hi, this is Claudia Philos. I'm with the Center for Hellenic Studies, and we're here today for an open house discussion with Gregory Nagy and Douglas Frame and Ali Marbury, who are joining us from Washington, D.C. Can you guys say hi?
Hi.
Hi.
And can you see all three of us out there? So all three of us are on the screen, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Great. And I'd also like to introduce some very valued and cherished members of our community. Many of them were participants in the first and second sessions of Heroes X, and they're all very active participants on Hour 25 and are really becoming part of the CHS community in general. So, Bill, can you say hi?
Hi, this is Bill Moulton from Petersburg, Alaska. We're all excited here to celebrate Norwegian Independence Day! Yay!
And Priscilla?
I'm Priscilla Newberger from Corvallis, Oregon.
Thanks. And Laura?
Laura Ford from Lynchburg, Virginia.
Thanks. And Kimmy?
Hi, I'm Kimmy Makaiba. I'm the one who asked the question about twins last week.
Yes, it was a very challenging question.
But I'm from Japan originally.
Great. Thank you. And Jenna?
Hi, I'm Jenna Cole, and I live in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Thanks so much. So Greg and Doug and Ali, can we just jump right in? I know we sent you some questions ahead of time. Is that someplace you might like to start, or is there something on your mind that you'd like to start with that you've been thinking about, Greg?
Well, because both Doug and I are so interested in twins, and there's this lovely question about twins among the many beautiful questions. But why don't I start with something that Kimmy asked, okay? So, and Kimmy is asking you, dear Doug, and she says, so would you say Nestor erred in his judgment when he instigated Patroklos to the battle wearing Achilles' armor, using the paradigm of Nestor's own twin myth, which is based on the Indo-European myth, when Patroklos-Achilles relationship was actually based on the Middle Eastern myth? If those questions can be put forth, I would very much appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for the question, and thank you for the beautiful summary, all of which I appreciate and agree with. Maybe up until the last point, where you made it an either-or. You know, I think that it can be both. You know, the Patroklos-Achilles relationship is really its own thing. It's neither Near Eastern nor Indo-European. But these other models are used. They're part of the tradition. So the Patroklos-Achilles relationship is seen, if I can put it this way, through the prism of the Indo-European twin myth, that's Nestor, and the Near Eastern myth, that's the therapōn relationship. They're both there. So I just want to be clear on that. Yes. I was thinking about it after our conversation last time, but maybe I didn't make that clear enough in my answer. Now the rest of the question, also a beautiful question. I got to remind myself of exactly how you put it. But the idea was, is Nestor at fault? And the way I would look at that is, Nestor is never at fault for anything.
He's very special, Doug? Why? Why do you say that?
This is, well, it could be, you could see this as my prejudice. No, I don't mean it that way. What I mean is that on the, as the poem is presented, Nestor is always on the right side. Here we might distinguish between on the surface of the poem and then, you know, how Nestor's past is evoked. And in the evocation of his past, all sorts of dangerous aspects to what Nestor does can emerge. But on the surface, the old man Nestor, no, he's true blue, number one. He supports kingship. He supports the Greeks 100%. He's not subversive. Maybe there's more to say than that, but that's my main point. Let me ask if that answers Kimmy's question. Is Kimmy?
Yes, she's there.
Yeah.
I see her.
Yes, I'm here and I'm listening. Yeah, I'm pondering over what you said. Can you understand me? I have accent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's thinking about what you said.
Well, let's leave it at that.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
I want to add something to what Doug said about Near Eastern things. And in earlier times of classical scholarship, when there were influences from other civilizations that were being investigated, people tended to think of those influences as one-way streets. Now, there's more and more of an awareness that whenever there is contact between cultures, including ancient big civilizations, that the influence goes both ways. Use the term Near East, it's almost geographical rather than anything more. And we're talking about that cultural phenomena that happen in is today the modern state of Turkey and the major outlying islands on the Aegean Sea. And so that's Asia Minor, and sometimes we say Near Eastern, and those cultures are heavily influenced by Mesopotamian civilization, including, here's something I want to bring up, Syrian civilization, which is a special later version of Mesopotamian civilization. And when you talk about Assyrians and Neo-Assyrians, that's where you get most of the so-called Near Eastern evidence for ritual substitution, for people behaving like body doubles of each other. And I was telling Claudia that I had to give a paper, well, I wanted to give a paper to some close colleagues in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations at Harvard a couple of weeks ago. And I was just test driving an article that I want to submit for a Festschrift. And Festschriften can be secretive about, or full of secrecy about who is being honored. So I won't mention who is being honored, but it's a great archaeologist that Doug and I are very friendly with. And I kept using the word sacred in this paper, and it just drove them crazy. They just don't like the word sacred. So here are people dealing with 2-3 millennia of civilization, and they prefer to get away with never using the word sacred because it's so radioactive, partly because of all the radioactivity of studying how the Hebrew Bible relates to Near Eastern civilizations. People don't want to get mixed up in political battles about ideologies and religious worldviews. But I was so amused that for me as a classicist, I use sacred left and right and get away with it, but not in that group. And similarly, when I talked about substitute kings, I thought they would just automatically accept that. And the Sumerologist among them, Piotr Steinkeller, said, oh, watch out. The evidence about substitute kingship is much more meager than outsiders think. And actually, it's mostly late Assyrian correspondences that document what little we know. So there were 2 surprises for me just within this month. And I want to tell everybody out there that Doug and I happen to be professional classicists. We're also, I think, very well trained in Indo-European linguistics. But that means that we have our own world of how we discuss and how we analyze. And I'm sure that outsiders will say, oh, you're using a word that I wouldn't use that way. And we would say the same thing about them. so to speak.
Yeah. Can I just jump in with this? Just a very
Yeah.
brief comment, just following up on what Greg began with, that when we refer to Near Eastern influences on Homeric epic, we're thinking in terms of geography. This is contact between civilizations, cultures, and mutual borrowing back and forth. The Indo-European side of things is time as opposed to geography.
Nice.
It's chronological. So you're going back. If you want me to put a date on twin mythology, I think in terms of last quarter of the 3rd millennium BC. Now that's way too precise, but it has to do with chariot technology, which I think is something that you find in the twin myth, both in Greece and in India. And that's my comparison.
Yeah.
That doesn't occur, that chariot technology, until about, let's make it the last half of the 3rd millennium, just to keep the numbers simple, 2500 to 2000. That's going back quite far enough, especially from the normal perspective of classicists. And classicists have a little trouble with that.
Yes.
Why do we have to think that far back? Well, you do have to think that far back because there's the connection is real. Just leave it at that.
Oh, I love it. One footnote to Doug's footnote, which is that when Doug said earlier that Nestor's always right, he can say that, and I know exactly what he means because he's looking at the system of communication. And there's a real system. It's not individual poets making something up. That's not the medium we're dealing with. We're dealing with systems of communication that go to the core of how people tell their myths and how they practice their rituals. And everybody's on the lookout for exactness and precision. And what Doug is saying is that the Nestor figure and everything that Nestor says is coded precisely. And so when Nestor says, when Doug says, Freudian slip, when Doug says that Nestor is always right, what Doug is also saying is he fits perfectly into the system of communication, this beautiful tradition that is alive and well for many millennia.
May I just come back to Kimmy's question a little bit, because I was being a little bit provocative in saying that Nestor is always right. The fact is that he puts Patroklos up to, taking Achilles' place, and Patroklos dies as a result. Yes, that part, in a way, is on the surface. Is Nestor at fault for that? Well, you can argue that different ways, I suppose. If Patroklos might think so. But it was Patroklos' decision, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you.
No, this segues beautifully into another question that was mediated for us by our correspondents out there. And this is a question for me that has to do with the status of Patroklos as a therapōn Achilles. And as you all out there know, I argue that therapōn is a word that's borrowed from a Near Eastern civilization, the Hittite civilization, and that it means in that civilization ritual substitute. So the question is, when Achilles and Patroklos are, let's say, together on a chariot, I'm being hypothetical here. If Patroklos dies for Achilles while they're together, then you can say, well, he's a ritual substitute for Achilles, even in terms of the twin myth. What happens when Patroklos decides to go off on his own and do things that are without the approval of Achilles, and certainly his rushing at Apollo in Iliad 16 is Exhibit A. Achilles told him not to do that. That's the kind of behavior that was not what a second banana would do. It's almost like trying to be a first banana. And so the question is, it seems to me, the questioner says, that Patroklos, in deciding to enter the battle alone, independently of Achilles, gave up his role of therapōn to Achilles at that point. Good question. And I would say that here I'm very much inspired by the work of a younger humorist called Dale Sinos, S-I-N-O-S, who wrote a beautiful monograph on Patroklos as the best friend, the philos of Achilles. And he would say that when Patroklos goes off on his own, yes, he is no longer the therapōn of Achilles, but then he becomes the therapōn of Apollo himself, who then kills him. And that's something that only Achilles should be doing, but he's doing it. So he's still a therapōn. It's just that there's a switch. He's now ritually standing in for Apollo, which is a big mistake.
Very good. I like that way of looking at it. But I come back to something I said initially, which is that what Greg is talking about, the therapōn relationship, that's one thing. The Indo-European twin myth, that's another thing.
Yeah.
They both feed into, let's say, the how to put it, the way you look at Achilles and Patroklos as the Homeric audience. Both these things can be evoked, but it's never going to be 100%. I mean, that's why I say that, and I don't know quite how to think of this, but I do feel that Achilles and Patroklos are their own thing as well, quite apart from Indo-European twins, quite apart from therapōn relationship.
And first you said it negatively at the beginning. You said, well, you could say it's neither
nor, or both and would be better.
But now you're saying it, and I agree. You can look at it negatively as neither nor, or you can look at it positively as both and. And that's what happens with synthesis, with cultural synthesis, is that when two different systems of thought get merged, you can say, well, this merged version is not really either one of the earlier versions, which were separate from each other, but in another way you can say that it's a continuation.
Yeah, so it's complicated, but and it's worth asking, following it out, what are the implications, of either way of looking at it. Can I just, this is sort of incidental, by the way, but just to make things a bit complicated. So we were talking about Indo-European being the historical dimension, and the Near Eastern being the geographical, spatial dimension. Well, it so happens that
yes.
the languages from which the Near Eastern material came and affected Greek epic are also Indo-European.
Yes.
But, this is Hittite and Luvian, I guess, is what we want to talk about there, in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. And the connection between those Indo-European languages and Greek is probably a lot older than, say, the connection between, you have to think of this in terms of a family tree, where you can have branches coming off at different points. And I already threw out the date of, up to about 2000 BC, if you're going to talk about connection with India. Connection with Anatolian Indo-European languages, I don't even want to try to put a date on it, but it's older.
And when Doug said the Homeric audience, that was really something, because that's a big bone of contention. And even for Doug and me, when we're reconstructing, and a cool way of saying reconstructing is building models. When we're building diachronic models, that's the way a linguist does it. When we do that, depending on who's doing the reconstructing, there may be more emphasis on earlier or later phases of this continuum that we're reconstructing. So for Doug, the most interesting phase of the quote-unquote Homeric audience is late 8th, early 7th century BCE. For me, I won't say it's the most interesting, but it's the most it's the phase that I've worked on more than any other phase. It's the 6th century BCE, and in Athens. One other point, this is about terminology, is we did say, both Doug and I, we did use the words Greek, which let's say corresponds to the people who are speaking what we call Greek in the Republic of Greece today. And then we said Near Eastern, which could be various languages spoken in Asia Minor, and then further southeast in what is Mesopotamia, what was Mesopotamia, what was the coast, that is the coastline of Phoenicia, and on and on. I mean, there's so many ways of saying this, but here's the tricky part: is if I say, or if Doug says Greek, that's not really saying Indo-European versus non-Indo-European, because Greek is full of elements that are non-Indo-European. And this is a big political problem, as well as a cultural problem, as well as a historical problem, as well as a linguistics problem. The very word Greek. If you look at a page of the genius of comedy, Aristophanes, people say that chances are in any given page only less than 50% of the words can be reconstructed as quote-unquote Indo-European. So Indo-European does not equal Greek, just as, and that's why I think it was very healthy when you said at the very beginning, is Achilles plus Patroklos is not an Indo-European model per se, it's not a Near Eastern model, it's not a quote-unquote Greek model, it's a synthesis.
Can I ask a question about that?
Please.
What are some of the tools that you use to kind of distinguish what comes from the Indo-European origins versus what comes from, like, for example, Doug mentioned thinking about chariot technology. So that comes in part from understanding the archaeology, and then also maybe understanding other texts or other traditions. But how can you and how can we who are learning more about this find ways to pull out where this maybe is hinting towards a connection back in time versus this particular passage is hinting towards a connection that is more about the geographical linkages?
Nice, nice. Could I take a shot at that? And what I do in, for example, that book, Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours, is make a distinction between diachronic approaches and historical approaches. When you're doing diachronic reconstruction, all you're really doing is looking at a system as it existed at one cross-section in time, which you can historically verify, and then at an earlier or later cross-section in time, and then you build models on how you go from one cross-section to another. That's a diachronic approach. The trouble is, suppose I build a diachronic model that goes from point X to Z, and oh, I'm so happy with it, but then something happens in between which affects my diachronic model, which is, for example, Attila the Hun comes and destroys the civilization that exists at point X, so that when you get to point Z, there's been a cataclysmic set of changes, and presumably that will affect everything else that I reconstruct. Now, when that happens, that's history, and that's a contingency that I cannot simply reconstruct. I need to know facts about whether Attila the Hun came or didn't come. See what I'm saying? So historical approaches and diachronic approaches are not the same because history can mess up your diachronic model. And what I think Doug did very beautifully and elegantly is show that a really good reconstruction is one where you do as much model building as you can, but you keep track of whatever historical information you have, like what archaeologists tell us concerning the remains of chariot technology. So ideally, all of us should combine diachronic and historical approaches, which are different.
I think that's a really good answer. Jackie, do you have more?
I was wondering. No, that's fine. I was wondering maybe are there sometimes maybe hints within the text themselves, like the way some of the passages are put together?
I don't think so.
No.
You know, I think that this is not something that, let's say, both the poets and the Homeric audience together are not aware of.
Okay.
Sometimes they know things are old. Let me deal with Nestor. You know that you know all the kind of secrecy, let's call it, or the you know, not letting the cat out of the bag about Nestor's traditions.
Coding.
Yes. You know, people know his old traditions, but think about how that works. It's not that they know that there's an Indo-European twin myth going on there. They know that a twin myth is going on, and they know that in that same context you have other pairs of twins that can be compared. I mean, this comes up especially in the catalog of heroines in the Odyssey. When Odysseus is in the underworld, it's just packed with pairs of twins, and well, mothers who bore twins. And these are an implicit comparison with, if you follow my interpretation, with Nestor's situation. So that part is understood, but neither the audience nor the poets would think in terms of, they know it's old in Nestor's case, because he goes back 3 generations. So he's automatically a representative of the, let's call it the antiquity of tradition. I mean, he's sort of synonymous with that. Mm-hmm. There's an appreciation of that, but that's how they would look at it, it seems to me. They wouldn't be thinking of it in terms, the way we look at it. You know, we scholars and, you know, let's put it this way, scientists of language who discovered the connection between Indo-European languages and gave us those tools just allow us to be more precise, more to find out more than I think was apparent to the audience at the time. I know what I'm trying to say here. I'm not sure I'm getting it across.
No, I think I get it. I appreciate your analogy to science. What I'm thinking of right now is how I study like human evolution. You know, so we are looking at DNA of fossil remains, and now we see there's this group called the Denisovians who we didn't even know existed when we were kind of setting up our paradigm of how human evolution was set up and who's related to who and who went extinct and everything. And so now we have this DNA that we know links people in Siberia to people in Indonesia. And we don't think of those two groups as having much physical contact with each other, but their DNA shows us that they do. So now people who study physical anthropology, like I, have to accommodate that in our model of how we explain what human evolution was. And so I suppose that maybe you're doing sort of the same thing. You have these stories, and you can look at the story itself, and then you can also look at archaeology, and you can look at other stories, and as you get more data, you manipulate your model in order to accommodate that. And so I think to a certain extent that's what you're saying?
Yes, I am saying that, and I think the DNA in this case is linguistic.
Right. Okay.
That's the science of it. That was a big discovery, you know, in the 18th century. That these languages are precisely related, not just vaguely.
Right.
There was something, before that. This is a quotation from Voltaire, I think, that in the science of science, quote unquote, of etymology, consonants count for very little, vowels count for nothing. So, in other words, it wasn't a science, but it became a science in the. Well, it was really, the English and the French in India who noticed that Sanskrit looks an awful lot like Greek and Latin, and then it was just made more precise after that. And then what happened after that, not only are the languages related, go back to a common source, but there are poetic traditions that go back to a common source. And Greg is an expert on that because he dealt with the metrics in the epic traditions. Both Greek and Sanskrit, going back to a common source. That's very powerful when you have the idea that epic poetry had an unbroken transmission. Let's use that, second, third millennium date again, being passed on in this way.
Yeah. And here's another DNA. One is linguistics,
Yeah.
the science of linguistics. Another one is the science, if it's done right, of archaeology, where, when you dig something up and it's dated in such and such a way, and you see that a chariot had, let's say, 5 spokes, well, okay, we better deal with that.
Yeah.
And I love your DNA metaphor. Just love it.
That's beautiful.
I see lots of questions.
Exactly. And I think...
Look, Doug.
And I think actually Ali was going to present one.
Oh, okay. Jackie asks, regarding therapōn, in both On Heroes and in the Iliad,
Protesilaos, yeah.
Protesilaos is depicted as almost an equal to Achilles, certainly a close comrade in war. Would you consider Protesilaos to be a failed therapōn? Also, regarding Achilles as a therapōn, scrolling.
There's more down, exactly.
Oh, wow. Look at all these questions. Oh, my God. While we were talking, the questions were just streaming at us.
So she asks, would the scene in,
Iliad 9.
Iliad 9, where Achilles is singing with a lyre, oh, it disappeared.
No, is that a visual metaphor for Achilles as Apollo's therapōn?
I lost the question. It disappeared.
It's a metaphor for what? I didn't hear that last part.
Is it a visual metaphor for Achilles as Apollo's therapōn?
Oh,
for Achilles as Apollo's therapōn.
That's beautiful. I'd say yes. The other one is a tricky question. That's a trick question because I couldn't tell whether our questioner really wants Protesilaos or whether it's just Patroklos. So if you really want Protesilaos and whether he is a therapōn, well, Achilles and Protesilaos, shall we say, never connect directly in the narrative. So it's by way of studying their hero cults, the fact that one of them has a tumulus, a tomb, on the west side of the Hellespont, the European side, and the other one has a tumulus on the east side, and they're looking at each other. I mean, the tumuli are looking at each other. So I know that's not a direct answer, but I think a direct answer would be almost impossible, but it's an interesting line of questioning.
That's beautiful. Can I make another comment? So we have Lawrence Darby, who's joining us, who says, "Hi, Professor Nagy. I took Greek composition from you in 1965.
Oh, my God.
Okay. He goes on to say, would you relate the relationship between Alcibiades and Socrates as part of this archetypal pattern, for the lack of a better term?
Ooh. Well, you're a good student and you remember your facts, and obviously you have read Plato's Symposium, where the staging of Socrates and Alcibiades makes you really think that they're some kind of dynamic duo, and they're a dynamic duo sort of in war, but also in lovemaking, and it's, as Doug would say, very complicated. But let's put it this way.
We could make a movie of it.
Let's put it this way. Socrates could be described as a dirty old man, and Alcibiades could be described as a pretty boy. So why is it that it's Alcibiades who's behaving as somebody who's coming on to this ugly old guy called Socrates and not the other way around? So Plato does all sorts of tricks about who's attracted to whom, and is it physical beauty or intellectual power? How am I doing, my dear old student and friend?
Okay, I haven't seen a return comment yet, but maybe he can type in a response. That's beautiful.
And then I noticed this wonderful question from a Greek-speaking person, and
Yes.
it's always very important to treasure the fact that there are people running around today, 8 million of them at least, who speak the language that we're studying as a living thing. And so Kyriakos is asking us to comment on the general way to interpret the Greek word proskinesis, I'm saying it in Erasmian, or proskinesis, now I'm saying it in modern Greek pronunciation, and how in the Near East, that's like when you're cowering in front of a potentate, a king of kings, and you kiss the ground or do some kind of self-debasing gesture that seems worshipful but is simply greeting a potentate, and how in the Greek experience, proskinesis is simply worshiping a god. And I'll say to my friend Kyriakos, that's the way it shakes out eventually, but it's much more complicated when you go further back. And I've just been studying an amazing text from the 5th century CE, the 5th century of our era, and it has to do with this Neoplatonic cultural paragon called Patroklos, who was director of the Platonic Academy in the 5th century. And there's a story about him that when he was a kid and came to the academy for the first time, he passed by the tomb of Socrates, and that he then made proskinesis to it. How do you like that? But that is opening such a can of not worms, but interesting things that I'll just leave it at that. But thank you for the question, Kyriakos.
Wait a second. This is.
Is he doing oh, he's doing another one now. Studying Alexandros, we come to signs of Dionysus, Herakles, as far as in India. I think Doug should take that because Doug is the Herakles expert.
Oh, no, I'm not the Herakles expert, but I have something to say about Herakles as far as India. I just yesterday looked at a Chinese image, which is Herakles in, I guess, early first millennium CE. Anyway, looking very Chinese, but with a club and with a bear, with a lion skin hood. Now, let me get back to the question. What was the question exactly? It's studying Alexandros, we came to signs of Dionysus, Herakles, as far as in India. I think that's a comment more than a question.
Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. And yes, there's a lot of cultural exchange, and there's been some very interesting contemporary study of it.
But I was very surprised to see Herakles in China, I have to tell you. I knew he was powerful.
Well, we have this colleague who studies the Silk Route, and trade routes do amazing things when it comes to civilizations in contact.
That's amazing. So actually, can we just talk a minute, back up, show a second to some things that we talked about before, because we're talking about sort of diffusion of ideas across time and space, and I know Doug used the word, we talked about something being old, and then we might think about something being new. I was just hoping I can get you all to talk for a minute about, when we're looking at and reading, let's say, Homeric poetry, should we be thinking about representing a certain time and place? Are we looking for a historical reality there? Can you say a few words about that?
I have a few things, but Greg, I want
I'm just going to take the focus back, and then I'd like then for Doug to zoom in. But I want to repeat something that Albert Lord, who was Doug's teacher and my teacher when we were young men, what he said once in an interview when people asked him, "Is myth historical?" And the answer was that when myth and history come into conflict, here it comes, myth trumps history. Mm-hmm. In other words, the way people think of their moral world and their cosmos, whatever historical information flows into those systems of verbal art will be influenced and really dominated and driven by the myth, not by the historical facts that may filter into them in one way or another. That said, dear Doug, please zoom in.
I completely agree with that. That that if you're thinking of epic poems, well, the period of the Trojan War, it's not going to be consistent. It's not going to show you, the way things. It's not reporting. It's myth. It's a story, and all sorts of things that belong to different times and places will come together and be part of the picture. It's the epic picture. That's true on the one hand, but what I'm really interested in at the moment is something that Greg kind of introduced a few minutes ago when he said that I'm interested in the period, the late 8th century, early 7th century BC, as the time when the Iliad and the Odyssey as a pair of poems were expanded to the dimensions that in which we know them today. Not that there weren't things happening later, especially in the 6th century in Athens. Still, I think of that as the, let's put it provocatively, as the Big Bang. That's very provocative.
I like it.
Big Bang in this case does not mean that nothing preceded it, because again we have Indo-European and poetic traditions that go back to Indo-European as the proof that there was something before it. But still, Big Bang in the sense of the Iliad and the Odyssey as we know them. So what interests me at this point in my thinking about Greek epic is how far do the two poems reflect conditions at that time, late 8th, early 7th century BC. And just to throw out the key idea for me at the moment is the whole issue of kingship. Because at that time, kingship really was coming to an end. Pretty much everywhere in the Greek world, with certain exceptions. In any case, it was under threat. And if you think about the Iliad and the Odyssey together, kingship, is challenged, shall we say, in the Iliad, and really challenged in the Odyssey, and then everything comes out well. Kingship is reestablished. It may have not been that way historically. The epic may have it one way, but so that's kind of my hobby horse at the moment. That's my answer.
My God, look, there's 66 viewers.
Yeah.
As we're speaking.
Yeah, we've been up there. So people are definitely engaged with the conversation we're having. It's really exciting. At this time, I'd like to just invite some questions from sort of inside our room. I think, Jack, do you have a question that you wanted to ask?
Yes. My question, Greg, is how do you rate Alexander III of Macedon as a student of the Iliad? Aristotle gave him a specially annotated edition that he kept with him all the time on his campaigns in a box, and I see there are a lot of echoes of Homer and also of Euripides in the earliest tellings of the Alexander story that we have, and one of the things is that Alexander, prior to the campaign in Asia, well, or just starting out in 334, visited the tomb of Protesilaos in Iliad, right? And also the tomb of Achilles in a rather ritualistic way, running around the tomb with his friend Hephaestion. I think they ran naked, you know, to somehow pay homage to Achilles. Anyway, both the tombs of Protesilaos and Achilles were visited in a rather pious expression of of Alexander's thinking about the campaign, and I just wondered if your studies have brought the issue of the ancient Greek hero forward to looking at Alexander's life and thinking.
And the answer, my friend, is yes. And you said it well. I would say it may be in a popular way to sum it all up that Achilles was channeled by Alexander. And maybe the best source for this is Plutarch's Life of Alexander, a really good overview of the tremendous cultural impact. And maybe it was the German thinker Hegel who said it best, and I can't quote him directly now, but it's something like this, that in the course of Greek civilization, Achilles is the model for unlimited potential, and Alexander is the model for unlimited fulfillment.
Myth and history.
Myth and history.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ali, did you want to do our next question?
I don't see that question you were sending me.
All the way down at the bottom? Actually, it's the most recent one.
Ah, this one.
So now we're going to change subjects a little bit, if you don't mind, in the last couple minutes.
Okay.
So, what is the significance of the dramatic instances of heroic madness, particularly in Euripides, and its effect both on the hero's private and public persona?
Ooh, well, okay. Madness in the ancient Greek world is simply being beside yourself. I deliberately said it that way. It's not the same thing as what my students, when I try to start my heroes course with Euripides as Herakles, would often say, which is, hey, Herakles just had temporary insanity. Just forget about that part and let's get on with how heroic Herakles is. So being beside yourself, having your mind connected with cosmic forces that can either be aligned or not aligned with the order of the universe, is what heroes are all about. They can have that happen to them. If the alignment is good, then we admire them. If the alignment is bad, then we're shocked, morally shocked at the depths of human behavior to which they can descend.
Good. I have just a passing comment because after we talked about a little of this the last time, and I haven't thought about Herakles as much as I probably should or would like to. You know, the madness aspect of it. Okay, anyway, there's another pair of twins, and you've encountered them in the Iliad, who are both doctors. And this is something that twins do, by the way. This is also true of the Vedic twins in India. They're doctors. And but anyway, the pair that you encountered in the Iliad, not too much, but here and there, are Podaleirios and Makhaon. Okay? In fact, it's Makhaon who has been wounded when Nestor brings him back to his tent and cures him magically. And Patroklos comes and hears the story about how he should take Achilles' place. What's interesting is that in the epic cycle, these two twins, they're sons of Asclepius, they are both doctors, are specialized. One of them, Podaleirios, well, let me start with Makhaon, because he's the one we talked about first. His name means the fighter, the warrior. So he's like the Castor twin. As far as medicine is concerned, he heals physical wounds. Podaleirios, this is according to the Kypria, the epic cycle, is able to, he's an internist, what we would call an internist. And so he sees what's going on inside, and in particular, he can cure mental diseases. He was the one that when Odysseus and Ajax quarreled over Achilles' armor after Achilles died, and Ajax went mad when he lost to Odysseus. Podaleirios was the one who could see that Ajax had gone mad. So anyway, somehow or other, this notion of madness in Herakles has got me intrigued a bit at the moment, because he's a twin too. And this mental disease that he suffers, I don't know where to go with it. I'm just throwing out things here.
Okay. And just one footnote, just again to go back to the last discussion we had about this, the symptoms of the madness on a personal level are closest to rabies. And in fact, the word for rabies is lussa, L-U-S-S-A, which is derived from lukos, L-U-K-O-S, meaning wolf. And the best translation for lussa is wolfish rage. And I don't know if any of you ever saw the Walt Disney cartoon where Pluto, the cute dog of Mickey Mouse, accidentally swallows a bar of soap and starts foaming at the mouth, and then everybody just scatters, and suddenly there's this personality shift. But seriously, in the case of Herakles, the personal symptoms are rabies.
Yeah.
He's like a mad dog, or let me say it in Old Norse terms, he goes berserk. And then, so much for personal terms. In cosmic terms, the whole universe is a big storm, and the storm is presided over by Hera, who is Zeus's partner in controlling the weather and the cosmos. And here you see the cosmos not going well, because the inner microcosm of Herakles' heroic being is coextensive with the outer macrocosm, which is the universe in a very stormy moment.
So I think Ali's actually going to share a question, but first I just want to share a comment, because I think it's sort of related, which is that William Theodore has written to say that some writers have suggested that Euripides was quite interested in current medical literature. So,
oh yeah, he had a big book collection of scientific research.
Thank you. Ali.
Okay, so the next question is from Georgios Spiliotopoulos. Warm greetings. Could we state that legend, throulos, is a predecessor of mythos? What is their connection regarding tradition?
May I? Okay, this is a lovely question, and thank you so much. I have a pet peeve about this, because Anglo-Saxon scholars like Geoffrey Kirk, in his book on myth, which was very influential in the third of the 20th century, Geoffrey Kirk and other people make a distinction between legend and myth, as if somehow legend is based on historical events somehow, and myth is not. And could I just say that I find it very healthy to remember that even the term legend goes back to post-Reformation days, but before the Counter-Reformation of the Catholic Church. At this point, let's call it early Renaissance, or late medieval, it's hard to draw the line, there was a great deal of local, what I call sacred narrative, which could even be read in church. And that's how we get the word legenda. But then when the Counter-Reformation set in, there was a big crackdown on legends. And religious orthodoxy required sticking only to those sacred narratives that were approved by the centralized church. But that's the real meaning of legend, is local sacred narrative that is not controlled by a central government. And I find the way 19th century scholars use the word legend to be not historically accurate. And I personally never use the word legend, ever, ever, ever. And in the new commentary that I'm preparing on Pausanias, every time the the translator translates people say as legend, I go back to the original Greek, which simply says people say. So legend is in many ways, I think, a modern construct. I'm not negative about you, dear wonderful questioner, because I love the way you asked the question. I'm quarreling with the word itself.
So we have another question from Shinclyde that states, I see myth relationship to historical records the same game as a father-to-son relationship. Myth is their internal view of their own story, while historical record would be the social worker log on their life.
Okay.
You take that.
Well, father and son. This puts, let's see, hang on a second.
Who's the villain here? I have a feeling father's the villain.
Antilochus.
Hang on a second. Myth, is myth the father here? I see the myth
I think so.
to historical records.
So.
The same game as a father-to-son relationship. Myth is their internal view of their own story. This is like a son looking at a father. That father is my internal view of my own story. I'm not quite sure I follow that. While historical record would be the social worker log on their life. Oh, I see that. That the internal view is a bit fanciful, and the social worker log is more factual.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I still like the definition of our spiritual father, Albert Lord, which is when myth and history come into conflict, myth trumps history. In other words, if you're thinking in myth, and it shouldn't be just dad, it should be father, mother, going back gazillions of generations. If with that friendly amendment, I'd say, well, that's a system of thought.
Yeah, well, in that case, so if they trump, I'm afraid mom and dad win. You lose out. But
So-
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually like the way that Shincline is actually getting us to think about the way that these things could play out in terms of, one generation thinking about their relation to the next through myth, right? And sort of thinking about your story in relationship to your father's story or something like that. I mean, the poetry is sort of invested in those metaphors, isn't it?
I agree. I was trying to parse it a bit as I was reading through it. I wasn't, I really was trying to understand.
But if I may,
Sure, yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's just a provocative kind of topic.
Here's the thing. I want us to think of father diachronically. I want us to think of the name Patroklos, Patroklos.
Oh, good.
He who has the kleos, not of dad, but of the fathers. And the fathers are father, mother, going back countless generations. It's the glory of the ancestors. It's ancestral system way of thinking. It's not your crabby old father.
I think we're all on the same page now. I think that in answer to the question, that's what myth is.
Okay.
It's the It's the kleos of the fathers.
Right, in that metonymic sense of fathers, right? Metonymic fathers.
Metonymic fathers.
Yes.
And could I say that there's a lovely article by a younger Homerist called Richard P. Martin, who is one of our favorite colleagues for Doug and me. And Richard Martin has written a beautiful article in CQ, which in this case stands not for Classical Quarterly, but Colby Quarterly. He gave a talk at Colby College about Telemachus versus Odysseus. And he makes a good argument that in the Odyssey, the age of heroes ends with Odysseus. And the age of the historical present starts with Telemachus, who in his generation, they are the fathers of most of the families of the people who make a difference in what Doug and I fancifully call the Homeric audience.
Yes, and this brings me back to what I was saying before, my current interest. When you have that divide, Odysseus as the last hero, right? That he belonged to that old world, but a lot separates him from it,
Yes.
right? A lot of strange things separate him from that world. So that it does bring you, in a sense, down to the present for the Homeric audience and poets, so that try not to. To me, Homeric audience is a pretty innocuous term. But, but anyway.
I think Doug defined it very well. I see that Laura has a question, and Laura is one of the people in the box.
Yeah.
So what's Laura's
I did. Your comments about Cleopatra reminded me of a question I've had for a long time. Do you place any significance in the shift from Cleopatron, as seen in the names of Patroklos and Cleopatra, to Cleandron?
Oh, actually, the thing is that this is I can make this a meditation on genitives, on the genitive case. It could be so boring, but you know the distinction between objective and subjective genitive?
Yeah.
Well, the oldest patterns of such genitive, you can do it both ways. It's a two-way street, so that the Cleandron, or the klea proteron anthropon of previous men, or the klea of the ancestors, it's both the glories that are spoken about the past, or the glories that the past speaks, and that includes past poets. See what I'm saying? It's reciprocal.
Just like in Pythian 8 that you have talked about?
Yes, perfect. And then there are beautiful variations on that theme in Indic poetry, where the glories of the past are both subjective and objective, shall we say? It's ancient people telling us, and it's us being told about ancient people.
Mm-hmm.
It's the contract.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
So, I have to note that it's 12:03, so I think we sort of reached our limit. But I'm really excited about the place that we've come to, where we're sort of thinking about kleos again, and we had started talking about the Odyssey, because the exciting news is that our community is starting to read the Odyssey and read part of Anna Boniface's book, Homer's Versicolor Fabric.
Perfect.
And the first 4 books of the Odyssey, so maybe we could sort of pick up discussion there during our next conversation.
Oh, Doug, let's come back to it.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead. It's got a promise from Doug.
That's lovely.
You saw, yes, a promise being extracted there.
Yes.
Okay.
It just happened.
So we'll have another meeting next week. Look to the Hour 25 website and the social media sites at the Center for Hellenic Studies for more details about that and about what we'll be discussing. And I'm so appreciative of everyone for coming to join us. We still have so many questions left on the table. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everything, but I hope you'll join us again, and we'll try and get to more and more. So really appreciate your time, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, Doug.
Bye. Enjoyed your questions.